Hi, I'm Mike, owner of the In-Groove in Phoenix, Arizona. Today I'm doing a shootout and review of the best sounding version of Marvin Gaye's What's Going On, one of the greatest records of all time. I would probably put this in one of my top 5 favorite records. I think it's one of the 10 best, greatest records maybe of all time ever released. A lot of people consider it the greatest album of all time ever released. It really is fantastic front to back. It's a masterpiece in the fact of extremely highly playable from front to back. I mean, it's a great album. It gives credit to the concept of an album. You don't want to listen to tracks on this, you want to listen to the whole thing. Okay, so this is a video that I filmed a month or two ago. I ended up refilming it because some factual information has changed. The ordering has not changed. The way I present these albums have not changed, but some of the information detail-wise has changed. Okay, I wanted to start out with an honorable mention. This is the Detroit mix. This is the mix that Barry at Motown originally rejected. He didn't feel it was commercial, and this is wildly different than the album that came out. The bass boogie's more. The vocals pan and layer in a way that's really unique. I actually really truly like this, and I find myself more times than not putting this on over the original mix. This is not going to be included in the shootout in the review because this is nowhere near the original album and the subsequent versions that's come out. But this is a fun listen. If you do not have this, I highly recommend it. This is the current in-print Japanese pressing, so it's really high quality vinyl. Let me see if there's any maker's mark on where this might have been done. It looks like it's probably a GZ pressing, but this was nice and quiet. It's a Japanese exclusive, so it's something that you have to get as an import from Japan. I've got it. A lot of places have this, but this is a really unique listen, and I recommend giving this a shot. If you're a fan of this album, there's nothing wrong with having this in the normal mix on your shelf. It is so much different. It's almost like another record recorded by the same artist. It's really that much different. So I really highly recommend it. Not only the music is arranged in a different fashion, forget about the bass and the vocal layering and all that. That's just like mixes. But there's music that's been extended, and there's different edits in the music. So it's really wildly different than what ended up coming out, right? So I highly recommend you giving that a shout. Look at, excuse me. Marvin Gaye, What's Going On? The original Tamla pressing, 1971? Yeah, I think this came out in 71. We got a few of them here. All originals, different, all originals on the yellow and brown label, right? Yellow and brown. When I see a clean copy of this, because it's such an iconic album and it's so difficult to find a very clean one, when I find like a VG++ near mint copy of it, I can't help but take it home. It's a masterpiece, and most of these are trash because it was a party album. You put this down on the table and you played it, and then you did it a couple hours later. But yeah, so what do I got here? Somebody wrote their initials on there. This was VAA. Really clean cover though. But yeah, what do we got here? 5 original pressings. There are slight variations in sound quality between these two. They go from awful to really awful. This is not, a record that I would recommend owning an original of, although I have 5. But that aside, that's more of as an historical artifact, knowing how difficult they are to get clean. If you're looking to just own one, if you're not really a collector and you want to have just a great sounding one, this isn't really it. They rolled off the bass and the upper end on this so much that it really just focuses on the middle, which is cool in a way because Marvin Gaye's vocal is very omnipresent in the mix. It's layered in a way that it's right in front of you, but everything else is so lost. And musically, this is such a good album, not just lyrically, and that is lost on these original pressings. They're not cheap. Near mint copies of this, man, oh God, they probably are $300-400 or more at this point. This has become a very expensive record, a record that is common. It used to be something you'd see all the time, but it was never common clean. They're always beat. So very difficult to find in good shape. Okay, so yeah, I don't recommend that whatsoever. Everybody's on the new pressing train right now. Everybody, the vintage, in light of recent information that's come out, everybody's like, you know what, I'm just getting OG pressings. I'm hearing a lot of that. And a lot of people are hunting out OG pressings, but that's not always the best. I mean, and here's a prime example of it. That is the worst sounding version of that album I'm even going to talk about, the original. Okay, so we got a slew of Japanese pressings. This is the very first pressing. Comes out on the Japanese, on the Tamla Motown red label. I am missing the obi. Very difficult to find an obi on these late 60s, early 70s pressing, but missing an obi. This was actually purchased from Discogs in near mint condition. It's actually got 4 inches of water damage here. So, one of the pitfalls of purchasing things on Discogs from inexperienced sellers. But I've been dealing with it for years, so, it is what it is. But first pressing, this is actually, out of the 3 Japanese pressings I'm going to show you, there's a little later pressing. I think that's 77. And this is maybe 2007, more than likely from a digital file. This is a unique thing in the fact that this record has gotten progressively better sounding as the years have gone on. Marvin Gaye, What's Going On? First pressing Japanese, although wildly better than the original Tamla pressing out of the United States. This is not that good, but much better. Now when we get around to 77, now we're getting a lot more bottom end. We're getting the thump that needs to be in an R&B album. An R&B album needs to thump. It's just the nature of the music. I mean, and you can see they kind of, as music kind of progressed, R&B led into like hip hop and into modern pop. You'll notice they kind of just ratcheted up the bass. But early R&B, that funky bass, that kick drum that is present on an album, like Inner City Blues, is it? Yeah, is it Inner City Blues? Let me see if I got one of these puppies to the back. I'm going to say it's Inner City Blues, but let me, all right. Yeah, Inner City Blues. Listened to it like 10 times, but of course I get in front of the camera and I get sidetracked on the name of the track. But you want to have that thump in your chest. I mean, it's just part of the music. It's part of the experience. That thump, thump, dun, 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 I don't want to sing it here, but you get the drift. That thump, you want to feel that. And that's something that actually you don't typically get in Japanese pressings. But I will say no, not this one, but I will say by 77, you started to have that. The 2006, more than likely sourced from a digital file. Not bad. The mix is nice and where you want it to be, but it doesn't really do anything particularly great. It is decent vocal, decent upper end, decent bass, decent separation, but for what this goes for, you would never want to pay over $100 for just an okay record. I will say it is the best of the Japanese pressings though, and still better than all of the originals. Too expensive. Mobile Fidelity did this from, I'm going to assume at this point this was from the original master tape. It's old because it's from 2008. It's not 100% guaranteed. It's half speed. I don't know if they were doing any DSD half speed. I want to say they weren't. I think I remember in the interview saying that they weren't able to Verispeed DSD. So my gut tells me that the Mobile Fidelity is using the original analog master tape. But I will say that this is not fantastic. It's good. It's better than what I've listened to so far, but it doesn't have what the better pressings have. You hear in them nowadays. It is not bad, but I will say for value-wise, for what this goes for how it sounds, I would say that this is like the least. This is the least on your list of copies to hunt out. For what this cost, I mean, I'd have to check the pricing now. MoFi records are kind of in a state of flux, but for what this went for, a month or two ago, around $300, this is the one that I would say kind of stay clear away from the most. Doesn't have the intrinsic value of the original, doesn't have the difficulty level of, saying, finding a first Japanese pressing with an obi, and it's, you know, it's only okay sounding, okay? So let's talk about this. This is the 1984 reissue from Motown on the Motown label. This, you can always tell the reissue. A, it's not a gatefold cover, right? And it also says originally released 5/21/1971. So it kind of tells you it's a reissue. It has a barcode. This record is awesome. Holy cow, this thing is fantastic. Blows me away. When I put this on, blew me away. This is unbelievably good. Now, I will say this. Motown collectors are hip to these 80s pressings. If it was me, sonically, and I had to just blind buy anything, I would take one of these white box reissues over pretty much any original Motown or Tamla or Soul, you know, any Motown sub-label product. The quality of the vinyl that Tamla, the quality of the overall pressing, the mastering, on a lot of Motown records was just subpar. And we know this now from reissues like this, like a lot of other reissues that have come out subsequently. You kind of at this point know that what's on these master tapes was significantly better than what Motown was putting out in the 60s and 70s. But this is a great record, but it's not cheap, and these are not easy to find. Now, I find a lot of Supremes in that white box label. You'll find Four Tops, you'll find other records, but for some reason, I virtually never see what's going on with that white box. But this is kind of the surprise of the video, and it was a surprise for me. As I've been spending time amassing these titles for this shootout video, this was not expected whatsoever. It just, you know, it blew me away. And I would say as a whole, this is probably my third favorite copy of this that you could own. And I'll say this as well, if you want to own kind of a vintage reissue, you want to own something kind of the 70s, early 80s era, you don't like modern reissues, you can be happy and own this. This is a great sounding record. I really recommend it. Okay, the next record is the most current reissue of this. This is 33 RPM, cut by Kevin Gaye from the original analog master tape. So, I remember when this was announced, I remember reading the hype, and it said that it was cut from the original analog master tape. The first time that this process has been used in 40 years, or it said something along those lines. And I thought to myself, well, that's really weird, because Mobile Fidelity did it as a one-step direct from the analog master tape, but, you know, a couple years ago. And that was like the thought in my head. But the wording is weird. And, you know, the majors always, you know, their hype stickers, their verbiage, it's so far out of what the rest of the audiophile crowd is looking for that it's almost ignorable. You know what I mean? They'll say stuff like on the Roxy Music titles, cut directly from the original analog master tape at Abbey Road at half speed. It's like, no, Abbey Road at half speed is digital. The sound engineers come out and said it's digital. What does this hype sticker mean? So there's not a ton of clarity. But this comes out, right? So it's 33 RPM. I get it. It sounds fantastic. Now, there's two versions of this. Oddly enough, both versions say cut by Kevin Gaye. The back shows made in the Czech Republic, so it looks kind of like it's a foreign pressing. But in the United States, every copy I have seen of this has been cut by Kevin Gaye. It's difficult because that hype sticker is a problem. It's very misleading. I don't know. And it's so misleading because, like, not only is it not so direct to analog mastering by Kevin Gaye at Coherent Audio, right? They use that same hype sticker on both on both copies. Like, hello, the other one's mastered by another mastering engineer altogether from a digital file. Okay, so Kevin did the first disc on this, all analog. The second disc, pretty sure, bonus material. So what do we got here? What's going on? Stripped version, mix with no string and no horns. You know, so there's a lot of demos, outtakes, and then the original mono singles of what's going on. God Is Love, Mercy, Mercy Me, Sad Tomorrows, Inner City Blues, and Holy Holy. That's bonus disc, but forget about that. Disc 1. I will say, for a 33 RPM version of this record, in my opinion, there is no better sounding copy of this. The fact that this is under $40 and it's in print now, it's also on my top 100 in print analog records you should own list because it's all analog, it is in print, it is inexpensive for what you get. Keep in mind, it's a double, it's a big, thick, stout and tip-on jacket. Unfortunately, it comes in these crappy paper sleeves. I don't know why in the world they would go through all that trouble to have Kevin put out such a fantastic sounding record. Go all out, do a nice stout and tip-on jacket, and then put it in these crummy paper sleeves. So they need a good cleaning right out of the chute. But this is fantastic, and in my opinion, this is the second best-sounding version of this to own. If you're an avid audiophile, you probably have thought to yourself, well, where's the one-step fall on this? It must be number 1 because he hasn't mentioned it yet. I have used this as an example of what Mobile Fidelity has been capable of doing. This record is so extremely good. So a few weird things to talk about on this. One, Mobile Fidelity has recently come out and started giving all their sourcing information. I want to say on their website they give out sourcing information for every single record but this one. This record sounds so much fuller, more open. All the instruments sound so much clearer, so much more detailed. The soundstage is so much bigger than this particular copy. It makes me wonder, it's like, was this even sourced from the original master tape? I'm curious at this point. Did they go back to the multi-tracks? Did they remix it? Mobile Fidelity says they don't remix records. I'm going to take them at their word on this because it is, and I think at this point in time they would say it if it was otherwise, but I don't know. This record sounds absolutely fantastic. And it is one of maybe the 3 or 4 best one-steps that Mobile Fidelity has ever done. And if there is ever going to be like a case to be made for their one-step process, the way they transfer to DSD and master from there, a record like this would be it. It's fantastic. The soundstage is unbelievable. A lot of people, comment on bass on some Mobile Fidelity reissues. Well, on a record like this, man, you want that thump. And that thump is there. I will say on a side note, though, when I listen to master tape copies, I'm a big audio reel-to-reel guy. Love 15 IPS Studio 1-to-1 copies. I've heard safety copies. I've heard master tape from my buddy Johnny D when we did the Wild Times. I will say as a whole, you tend to get a lot more bass and a lot more upper end on a master tape that is not prevalent on a record. It's probably cut in a lot of cases due to limitations on cutting a record. So, yeah, this record has not only the bass in spades to where, when Inner City Blues kicks in, it's like you're being punched in the chest. This helps, but you don't get that experience with any of these other copies that I'm talking about. And it's not just a matter of, okay, well, they put a bunch of bass in it. That can be fixed with, a bass knob on your gear. That's not the case. It's everything about this has such a individual nature to it. Every instrument has a better layout on the soundstage to where you can hear the drums, the bass guitar, the guitar, everything that's going on in the record, you can hear it so much clearer and defined and bigger. It's like the difference between playing in a room at someone's house versus playing in like a music hall. It's a bigger, more open presentation, and Marvin's voice now pops out at you. It's a great experience. Now, this record is not without its drawbacks. This is a record that 45 RPM, I was a little concerned about that when this came out because, like I said at the beginning of this video, this is a record that if there was ever, if you ever were to explain to somebody from a distant world what an album is, you would play them an album like this, like Sgt. Pepper. This is what album music is all about. Meant to be listened to, side 1 to the end, side 2 to the end. That gets broken up a little bit with this because it's cut at 45 RPM. tracks that don't necessarily end on the record have to be faded out, kind of reminiscent of like an old 8-track. It's done in a way that's not crazy, but you give that up with this over the Marvin Gaye, 33 cut by Kevin Gray. Not only that, there's a lot of hyper detail on this. The record is so, like I said, everything is so transparent. There's more sibilance on this record, and that's the sound when Marvin is singing. It's really pronounced on what's going on. It's there, and sibilance bothers some people more than others. It bothers my wife a lot, for instance. If I was to play her both of these records, I think she might even prefer this. But what, in my opinion, you gain from those two drawbacks is worth it, because it's a more visceral experience listening to this. I noticed as I was kind of listening to Inner City Blues 20 times and What's Going On 20 times and all these different pressing, I would get up in the room and I would kind of, I would chug along as I was kind of setting things up, and I noticed that with this. This kind of has that more make you want to dance kind of sound to it. This isn't a slouch, so this has been very tough to go back and forth between these two. There's so many good things to say about both of them. But I will say this, if you don't have this, I don't know what the current pricing is on this. Like I said, things are a little weird right now with Mobile Fidelity on their pricing. This was around $300, not the easiest record to find. This is $39.99. You really got to dig this album to pay the money for this, but yeah, either one of these I can really recommend, or up to and including that 84 Motown pressing. That just blew me away. All right, guys, subscribe to the channel. Until next time.